What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another episode of PS4 jailbreak tutorials. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you guys how to run a Linux distro on your jailbroken PS4. Now, this is one of the biggest things you can do on a jailbroken PS4. You can run a full Linux desktop operating system on it, and this gives you a whole load of extra functionality, obviously being able to run PC games, as well as more emulators, as well as media apps like, VLC Media Player, Kodi. You can also obviously browse the web with a proper internet browser and, just use it as a desktop computer, essentially. This is going to be a very long video because I'm going to go into a lot of detail here and try and, not miss anything out so that everybody can get set up with Linux on your PS4. So the first 15 to 20 minutes of this video will be showing you guys how to actually get set up with Linux and get it running on your jailbroken PS4. The rest of the video will be showing you guys how to optimize Linux on the PS4 to get better performance in games, get more PC games running, more emulators, and, customizing the distro, updating the distro with the latest packages and stuff. So that's why this video is going to be quite a bit longer than usual, because I want to make sure that I get everything covered so that, you can get the best experience with Linux on your jailbroken PS4. But first, this video is brought to you by the Ridge Wallet. The Ridge Wallet is a compact wallet designed with RFID blocking plates that can hold up to 12 cards with room for cash. I've been daily driving the black aluminium Ridge Wallet for over a year now since my initial sponsor spot for this, and honestly guys, it's a great product. It helps cut down on that awful wallet bulge you get with traditional wallet designs that are far too big and bulky. They also come in over 30 different colors and styles, including some more premium designs like this awesome burnt titanium look that I'm going to be switching to from now on. The Ridge also makes a perfect gift for Father's Day, which is coming up soon, so if you haven't picked out a Father's Day gift yet, I highly recommend you check out the Ridge. They've got their own Father's Day guide on the website that can help you pick out the perfect Father's Day gift. So check the link in the pinned comment below and use code MODDED at the checkout to get a 10% discount. So thanks to Ridge for supporting the channel. Okay, so before we get into the tutorial, there's a few things I need to cover here first of all. So firstly, this is not a replacement for the PS4 operating system. So we're not basically turning our PS4 into a Linux box and then not being able to go back and play our PS4 games. This is more of a dual boot setup where you can boot into Linux whenever you want, access PC games, emulators, do what you want to do, and then you just have to restart and you will boot back into the PS4 operating system. So it's more of a dual boot setup where you can switch back and forth between the two, and you don't have to worry about Linux overwriting anything with the PS4's operating system. They're completely separate. You don't have to worry about that. The second thing is we're going to be loading Linux from an external hard drive or some kind of external storage like a USB drive. You can technically run Linux from the internal hard drive of the PS4, but you tend to run into more compatibility issues that way, where only certain PS4 models work well running Linux internally. So I would highly recommend you use an external drive because it tends to give you the best compatibility and it works on pretty much all PS4 models. So that's definitely what you want to go with. Also, you're going to need a USB keyboard in order to install the distro. Now, you can use a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse once you have the distro up and running, but to initially install it, you are going to need a USB keyboard. Also, a USB hub is recommended to give yourself some more USB ports. It's not required, but it would help, especially since the PS4, the base PS4, only has 2 USB ports at the front, and one of them will be taken up by your USB storage device that's running Linux. So you'll only have one USB port free on a base PS4, so a USB hub will definitely help. Also, there seems to be some performance issues with the PS4 Pro right now on 7.55, where the 7.55 LinuxLoader is causing poorer performance on PS4 Pro than even base PS4s. Linux is still usable, but it's not as good of an experience on PS4 Pros right now, or at least on certain models of PS4 Pro. Hopefully that issue will be fixed in the LinuxLoader, and when an updated LinuxLoader comes out that fixes the issue, I will make sure it's linked down in the description. Okay, so now that we have that all out of the way, let's get into installing Linux. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is head over to our computer and plug in your USB drive or external hard drive that you're going to use to boot Linux from. And what we're going to do is, first of all, we need to make sure that that USB drive is set up in FAT32 format and that it is using the MBR, the master boot record partition table or partition style. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a program called Aomi Partition Assistant, which I'll link in the description. Obviously, you can use other formatting software. So what we need to do is make sure that the disk type here is set to a MBR disk. So right now it's set to GPT. Just make sure it's MBR. If it's not MBR like this one, then make sure you right click on it and go to convert to MBR disk. So if we go ahead and do that and then apply, just to make sure that we successfully change that to an MBR disk. There we go. And then we want to format the drive in FAT32 format. So to do that, we're going to right click on the drive, go to create partition, and we're going to select FAT32 as the file system, click OK, and then again, click apply up in the top left to format that drive in FAT32 format. So there we go. So once it's in FAT32 format, you can check by going to your computer and right clicking on the drive, going to properties, and just making sure that the file system says FAT32. So once that's done, you can click on the drive and basically you want to copy these 3 files in. So you're going to need your bzImage, which is like your kernel, and you're also going to need the interim FS and the distro that you want to run. So I'm using Fedora 32 from ITmania. Now the reason why I would recommend using Fedora 32 here is because it comes pre-installed with Mesa 20, and you can update from ITmania's GitHub page to Mesa 21 on this distro, whereas other older distros are still running Mesa 19 or Mesa 18. And, you know, the newer version of Mesa that you install, the better compatibility and performance you're going to get when running games. So that's why I would recommend this distro. But obviously you can use any other distro. There's Manjaro, Catjaro, there's obviously Mint, and there's PSX ITarch Linux as well. So you can run a bunch of different distros. They all install in the same way, apart from Gen 2 Linux, which is different. It installs differently, but I have a tutorial for Gen 2 Linux already. So I'll link it in the description if you want to install that specific distro. But for any other distro, it should install in the exact same way as I'm showing here. So get your distro and get your interim FS and your bzImage and copy them into the root of the USB drive. Okay, so also you want to make sure you rename the distro. So rename the distro to psxitarch.tar.xz. So you need to make sure you rename it to psxitarch.tar.xz because the install script is set up to install that distro. So any other distro that you're putting on there, you need to rename to psxitarch so that the install script will work. Okay, so one of the issues you might run into straight away is that you might require a different bzImage file than the one I'm using in order to get Linux running successfully, because obviously different models of PS4s have different chipsets and the bzImages are set up for specific PS4 chipsets, as well as having different kernel versions as well. So if you go onto this post here that I'll link in the description, this one has a bunch of different bzImage files, a bunch of different kernel versions that you can try. The one I'm using here is the 5.3.18 one. What I would recommend is trying the latest version that you can find, like 5.3.18. And if that doesn't work, then try one of the 5.3.7 ones. And if that doesn't work, try one of the older 4.14 ones. I'll put a bunch of them in the description that you can try. But as a general rule, I would say try the latest one that you can find and then work your way down. Just do it that way and keep trying each one until one of them actually works on your PS4. That seems to be the way to go. So now that we've done that, we've got our bzImage on here, our interim FS and our distro renamed to psxitarch.tar.xz. We can then go ahead and eject the drive and plug it into our PS4. Okay, so once you're on the PS4, what you're going to want to do is plug in your USB keyboard into the PS4, then go to the settings menu, and we need to change a few settings because one of the issues that you'll come across if you don't change these settings is that you will essentially just get a black screen when you launch Linux, or you'll lose signal and you'll never regain signal after loading the Linux payload. So in order to avoid that from happening, there's a few settings we need to change. So if we go down to System in the settings and we go to Enable HDCP, you want to make sure that is disabled, unchecked. So make sure Enable HDCP is off. Also enable HDMI device link. You want to make sure that is off as well. And then if you go into the sound and screen options, you want to make sure that the video output settings are set to 1080p for the resolution. The RGB range, you want to set that to full. You also want to set HDR off, and also deep color output, you want that off as well. So just make sure you have all of those settings set correctly, and then you shouldn't run into those black screen issues. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go onto the internet browser, and you're going to load up an exploit host that has the Linux payloads in them. So we'll just use this one here, which has Linux on it. And we're going to run the LinuxLoader 1GB payload. You'll tend to find usually a 1GB or a 3GB. That says 4GB. Not sure if it is 4 or if it's just mislabeled. But yeah, normally you'll find like a 1GB or a 3GB payload. And that relates to the amount of VRAM that's allocated to the GPU. Because if you remember that the PS4 uses the same memory for the CPU and GPU, it just allocates a certain amount to each one. So if you use the 1GB payload, it means 1GB is allocated as video memory for the GPU, and obviously the rest is normal system memory for the CPU. So that means with 8GB of RAM, you'll have 7GB of RAM basically available on the system and 1GB as VRAM. Whereas if you loaded like a 3GB LinuxLoader payload, then 3GB would be VRAM, and you'd have 5GB left over for the CPU. So for installing though, you want to make sure you use the 1GB payload. So we're going to run LinuxLoader 1GB. All right, there we go. So you can see we get the waiting for clients showing up there once it actually boots successfully, once it loads the jailbreak, runs the payload. Then you'll get a black screen. Now, what tends to happen is you'll lose signal for a few seconds, but if you set everything up in the settings, as I said before, you should regain signal after a few seconds. So we just wait a few seconds here. It can be anything from like 10 seconds, 15 seconds for it to actually start up. So before this pops up, you'll know it's working because you'll see that the LED on the front of the PS4 should be blue and kind of pulsing purple every few seconds. So that'll show that it is actually working. Okay, so now that we've regained signal, all we have to do now is go ahead and run the install script. So what you need to do is type in exec for execute, and then install, and then dash psxitarch.sh. And that is the install script. So execute install psxitarch.sh, press enter, and then wait for it to install. Now, again, this is going to take a long time. I'm using an SSD as my external drive connected via USB 3 USB port, SATA to USB adapter. So it shouldn't take too long to install for me, maybe 5 minutes or so, maybe less. But obviously, if you're using a slower USB drive or something that you're storing Linux on, this could take anything from like 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how slow your drive is. So just give it some time to install. You'll know it's done because it will give you another prompt to enter another command once it's finished. Either that or it'll just boot you straight into the Linux distro. Okay, so there we go. It's finished doing its install script. So once the install script finishes, you then need to run the script to actually start the distro. Now, you're not going to have to do this every single time. This is just for the initial first time setting this up. Once it's set up, the next time you reboot the system and you go to run Linux again, it should just automatically boot you into the distro, after a few seconds. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in exec space start dash psxitarch.sh and press enter, and that will run the start script. As you can see right there it goes, starting up the distro. So again, this is basically what it'll do automatically when you next boot into Linux. So it'll just do this, and then after a few seconds, it should boot you into the distro. Now, one of the issues that happens on my PS4, now I never noticed this happening on 5.05 or 6.72 when running Linux. I've only encountered this on 7.55 recently. So I'm just getting a black screen. Obviously, I had a signal when we were in the shell, but when it's trying to go into the GUI, the graphical user interface, it goes into this black screen. So in order to fix this, what I've found is I need to unplug the HDMI cable and plug it back in on the PS4. That's step one. So now I don't even have a signal anymore. So after unplugging the HDMI and plugging it back in, I have no signal. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control-Alt and press F2 on the keyboard. So Control-Alt, F2. So that should switch us back to the shell. And as you can see, I have a signal now. So what I'm going to do again is do Control-Alt again and then do F1. So Control-Alt, F1. And that should fix it and get me in there. As you can see, I'm in to the actual GUI now. So yeah, it's a bit annoying. I'm not saying that's going to happen for everybody. It might just be certain models of PS4, but that issue happens to me all the time now, and it never used to happen on previous firmwares. So yeah, generally all you have to do is unplug the HDMI, plug it back in, do Control-Alt-F2, which will switch you into the shell, and then do Control-Alt-F1, which will switch you back to the GUI, and you'll then get a signal, as you can see here. Okay, so now that we've booted into the operating system, the first thing we need to do is log in using the password ITmania, uppercase IT, lowercase mania. Now, the first thing that you'll notice when you log in is obviously that it's in Russian, so we need to change the language. We can also change the keyboard layout and the time zone. So we're going to do that first of all, and then I'll show you guys how to customize this a little bit better, because obviously I'm not a big fan of the way that this looks right now. Obviously the taskbar, all the icons are pretty small, not so easy to see for this tutorial. And obviously the background's a bit busy. You've got all this stuff on the right. I'm not a big fan of how it looks, but we can customize that, and we'll do that once we've set our language and our time zone. So first thing we're going to do is head down to the terminal down here in the bottom left-hand corner. If we open this up, and I'm just going to get rid of the transparent background so that things are easier to see right here. So we'll go ahead and do that and zoom in so you can see what I'm about to type. So to change the language, quite simply, you just do sudo nano /etc/locale.config.conf. So enter that command, press enter, type in the password ITmania, the same as the username, and then we're going to change the language to EN_US for English. Obviously, you know, change it to whatever language you prefer. And then we're going to do Control-X to exit, Y for yes to save, and then enter. So the next thing we want to do is set our keyboard layout if you're not happy with the current layout. So what we're going to do is we're going to do sudo locale ctl and then set-keymap. And then I'm going to set it to UK for a UK keyboard. Obviously, you can do US for US keyboard. Go ahead and set that. And then finally, we want to set our date time. So we're going to do sudo time date ctl. And then we're going to do set-time zone. And I'm going to set it to Europe/London and set that time zone. If you don't know what time zone to set, you can change the command. So if you do list-time zones, that'll give you all the time zones. You can scroll through them to find the one that you want and then just copy it and use it in the set command. So yeah, there you go. So that's how you set the keyboard layout as well as the language and time zone. So once you're happy with that, you can then restart to apply the language change. So to do that, we're just going to type in reboot and press enter, and that will reboot the system. Now, as you'll be able to see here, it will just reboot you straight back into the PS4's operating system, just as it normally would do if you were on the PS4 operating system and you did a restart. It's exactly the same. So it will just shut down and then boot you back in. As you can see here, we're now booting back into the PlayStation 4's operating system right here. So as you'll see, it hasn't affected anything on the PS4 operating system. So everything is still up and running. As you can see here, we've still got our PS4 operating system. All of our games and stuff are still installed. So running Linux has not affected anything on the PS4 operating system. So to boot back into Linux again, all you have to do is obviously go back onto your internet browser and go back onto the same exploit site that you were just on and run the LinuxLoader payload again. Although this time, if you want to, you can load one of the larger video memory payloads like the 3GB or 4GB VRAM payloads to give you more video memory when running games. But obviously that will negatively impact the amount of RAM that you'll have in the system. So it's kind of a fine balance depending on what you want to do. You might want to go with the 1GB or the 4GB or 3GB payloads. But, you know, you can use whichever one you want now that we have the distro installed. So this time when it regains signal, it should just boot you straight into the distro as it's doing right here. So you don't have to type in the start command or having to type in the install command again. That only happens when you're installing the distro. Now that we have the distro installed, it boots you straight into the OS. Okay, so we're back into the OS now, so we can go ahead and log back in using the password ITmania. And what you'll see this time is that it has changed to English, so we can don't show me this message again and update all the names. and we have the distro successfully configured for our language, our keyboard layout, and our time zone. So now that we've done that, we can customize things just a little bit. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to go into the start menu in the bottom left-hand corner and go down to preferences and then go to customize the look and feel, because I need to make things bigger so you guys can see things clearly. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this to a dark theme, and then I'm going to change the default font and change the size to 16, which should enlarge everything. And then we'll go ahead and apply that, and then we'll go over to the icon theme, change that to a normal icon. We'll go over to the Windows border and change this to a different Windows border. And then that should do right there. The next thing I'm going to do is go into accessories and go to Concave Manager and go to themes, and we'll scroll down to the bottom and just select a different theme and then deselect it again to get rid of all the widgets. So we just have the desktop background changed. And then I'll change the start menu size as well by right-clicking down on the taskbar, going to panel settings, and then we'll increase the size of the panel, maybe to kind of 40. We'll change the icons as well, make them a little bit bigger. And then we'll go to appearance and change that to system theme and close. And I know it looks kind of horrible right now, but that's just because it hasn't refreshed. You have to log out and log back in to refresh it. But before we do that, we'll also open up the terminal, and I'll zoom in here, and I want to install a kind of universal dark theme for all of the applications. If I go in here, you can see this is kind of using a light theme. It doesn't look that great in my opinion, so I want to change this to a kind of universal dark theme. So what I'm going to do is install two things. I'm going to install by typing in sudo dnf install. I'm going to install something called gnome tweaks, and I'm also going to install gnome-themes-extra, which will include one of the dark themes. So we can go ahead and type in our password and install that. There we go. So type in Y for yes to install it. All right, so it successfully installed that. So to run it, we're going to do gnome-tweaks in terminal, and that should run it. And then we can go to appearance and just change this to dark for applications. And then I think everything else will be fine on default. And then we should be good. So all we have to do is log out and log back in to apply all of that. So if we go right here, we go to log out and just log out of the system. And as soon as it regains signal, we'll go ahead and log back in again. And there we go. As you can see, we've got our dark theme showing up here. We've got our larger icons, and we've got our larger font size for all of our menus, so that everything should be nice and clear. So yeah, that's just a little bit of customization that you can do to kind of get the distro looking the way that you like. So now that we've done that, also we've got our nice dark theme on our menus and everything and our applications. So now that we've done that, there's a few things to mention. First of all, if you're wanting to connect to the internet, if I click down here, you can see that the Wi-Fi drivers are working on my PS4. They don't work on all PS4 models. So if you have one of the models where the Wi-Fi drivers don't work, then you're going to have to connect using a wired connection, which means either connecting directly to your router, or you can do what I'm doing right now, which is connecting my PS4 to my computer with an Ethernet cable and using connection sharing on the computer to share the computer's internet connection with the PS4. So that gets me connected. If the Wi-Fi drivers aren't working, you can see Bluetooth is also working down here as well. You can go ahead and connect any Bluetooth devices that you want. So having a look at some of the stuff that's pre-installed real quick, as you can see, if you go into games, you've got the Dolphin emulator built in, which as you can see is a Wii and GameCube emulator. You've got Lutris, which is kind of a kind of universal game launcher. You've also got a PS2 emulator, PS1 emulator, PSP emulator, RetroArch, which obviously allows you to run games from many older generation systems, from like the original NES and Sega Master System all the way through to, you know, GameCube games and PS1 games. So you've got that pre-installed as well. And obviously you have Steam pre-installed too. So you can log into your Steam account and download and run your PC games. So you've got all of that built in there. There's some graphics stuff, internet stuff. Obviously Google Chrome's installed. You've got a torrent installed. You also have TeamViewer installed, so you can remotely log in to the distro from another device and use, pass through the keyboard and mouse that way so that you can still use your keyboard and mouse on the distro while having it connected to another computer, which is quite handy that that's pre-installed. There's some Office stuff. Obviously, you also have things like Spotify and VLC Media Player and Kodi, a media center as well, pre-installed. So quite a lot of stuff that's pre-installed there for you guys to mess around with. But before we get into running any of that stuff, the next thing we need to do is get the system updated. We want to update Mesa, and we want to just do a general update to get all the packages updated, because this distro was compiled months ago, potentially years ago by the time you're watching this maybe. So you want to make sure you update those packages because they'll all be out of date. So what we're going to do is click on to the terminal, and then we're going to do the update command. Now, the normal update command on Fedora is sudo dnf update. Now, you don't just want to run this general update command because it will overwrite the custom drivers that are set up to support the PS4's GPU and potentially the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth drivers as well, maybe. So if you do a general update, it will overwrite those custom drivers with the latest versions of the default drivers, which will not work, and that will screw up the whole system. You also don't want to update the kernel either. So we need to exclude those packages that we don't want to update. So we're going to do -X for exclude, and then we're going to exclude 4 packages. We're going to exclude the kernel, and then we're going to do star, comma, and then we're going to exclude Mesa as well, and star, comma, and then also exclude libdrm, again, star, comma, and then finally, we're also going to exclude xorg-x11-drv -A, and then again star, because those contain custom drivers that if you overwrite will screw the system up. So we're going to just do a general update command, exclude those 4 things, and then press enter, and obviously type in the password, and that will do the general update, and that will update all the packages apart from those 4, so you'll get your system up to date without screwing anything up. And obviously type in Y for yes to do the update. Okay, so now we have the update completed. We can go ahead and clear that. So the next thing we want to do is update Mesa. Now we can check the current version of Mesa by typing in glx info and then -B and then vertical line and then grep string. And as you can see here, we're currently on Mesa version 20.2.0, but we can update this higher. So if we click on Google Chrome, one of the things you'll notice is that ITmania's GitHub page should be bookmarked in Chrome, so we can just click it up here. And as you can see, we have PS4 Linux RPM Mesa Git. If we go in there, we can go ahead and click the code and download it as a zip file. Okay, so once it's downloaded, we can click up here and show in folder. So you can see it right here. If we right click and extract it to this location, and then if we go into the folder, we're going to delete the For Cyberpunk folder and the testing folder. And we're also going to delete the README file as well. So get rid of those. And then if we head back to the folder and then right click on it and open in terminal, just to get to that location. So to actually install it, we're going to enter 2 commands, sudo rpm --rebuild db. I'm going to hit enter and obviously enter the password, ITmania. And then once that's done, we're going to enter sudo dnf install and then star or times icon and then press enter. All right, there we go. And then we just hit Y for yes to install, and that will install that version of Mesa, which should only take a few seconds. All right, there we go, complete. So once it's completed, we can just check to make sure that installed successfully by going back and entering that same command again, glx info-b grep string. And as you can see, the Mesa version is now set to Mesa 21 instead of version 20. So we have successfully updated that. So obviously you're not going to be able to update to the very latest version of Mesa because it has to be a custom driver. And if the custom driver hasn't been created for this distro, then you can only go so far. But at least we've managed to update it to Mesa 21. Okay, so now we have everything up to date. So let's test some emulators here real quick and then some games, some PC games. So if we go on to games, we've got the Dolphin emulator, which you can't currently use. At least it's not currently available on Orbis OS in like RetroArch or anything. So if you want to be able to run Nintendo Wii games and GameCube games, then you're going to need to run Linux on the PS4. So what we can do is we can go into options and go to graphics settings, because the first thing you want to do is change the renderer from OpenGL to Vulkan to get better performance. So make sure you do that. The second thing is to configure the controller. So obviously, if you can get the Bluetooth drivers working with the PS4 controller, great. There is a guide that I will link in the description on GBA Temp, which kind of shows you how to configure Bluetooth to work with the PS4 controller. It did not work when I tried to do it, when I tried to follow that guide. So maybe it's only certain models of controller that work, or maybe certain models of PS4. I'm not entirely sure. The easiest way, though, to get the controller working is obviously to plug it in via USB, and then it should just work automatically. So I've got my controller plugged in, so I'm just going to go to Options and then go to Controller Settings. And then from here, we can configure standard controller. We can enter Sony Computer Entertainment wireless controller. And then obviously you just want to bind the buttons to the controller, as I've just done here. And then you can save it to a profile, just call it PS4 and save. And then that will get your controller working. So let me just run one of the games that I downloaded here, Mario Kart Wii. Let's give this a try. Just aware of the risks, click OK. And there we go. As you can see, we've got a Nintendo Wii game now running on our PS4. Okay, and as you can see, we've got the game running and it's working pretty well, to be honest. Not running into any major stutters or any other kind of issues. Maybe a little bit slow, not quite running at real-time speed, but part of that is because of this PS4 Pro bug that I explained in the beginning of the video that kind of tanks performance. But if you're running on a base PS4 or that bug has been fixed by the time you're watching this, then you'll get even better performance here on these games. But as you can see, it is definitely playable. So yeah, that's one emulator that you can run through Linux on the PS4 that otherwise you cannot run, as far as I'm aware, on Orbis OS, the PS4's operating system, through any kind of homebrew emulator, at least not yet anyway. So yeah, so if we go ahead and exit out of this. So one thing also to note with some of the other emulators, like for example, the PS1 emulator, because it's not being configured on this distro, it will actually just crash when you try and launch a game, or the game will not launch. And that's because you have to go into configuration, plugins and BIOS and change the graphics driver to OpenGL. So it might be set to Xvideo by default, which will not work. So you need to change it to OpenGL driver. So that's just something that can happen if we try and run this. I think the controller's already pre-configured on this one. Now, obviously, you can run PS1 games using, you know, the built-in PS4 operating system, Orbis OS. There's RetroArch and there's other emulators. There's obviously the built-in backwards compatibility emulator in the PS4 as well that can run PS1 games. So yeah, there's lots of ways to run PS1 games on the PS4 other than this, but this is just another option, is to run it through Linux. And as you can see, the game is running right there. So that is the PS1 emulator. Obviously, there's a bunch of other emulators in here. Let's just head over to RetroArch, which is obviously the biggest emulator that we have. We'll go ahead and full screen it. So obviously, it's in the wrong language. That's a bit of a problem. If we head to the settings down here, the second option, if you scroll down to the bottom, you should find the little icon with the person, the little person icon. If you click that, the language is right here. So it's set to Russian. So we'll just set that back to English. I'm going to use my PS4 controller for this because I'm not a fan of the way the scrolling works with the mouse. So yeah, now that we've converted that back to English, we can then go ahead and set this up. So obviously from the main menu, you want to go into the online updater. For some reason, it's triangle to select and circle to go back instead of X and circle, which is a bit strange, but whatever. It won't be like that when we actually go into a game. So obviously you've got all the different cores that you can download. Let's try a Nintendo 64 game, because if you remember using Orbis OS in the previous episodes, using the built-in homebrew version of RetroArch by Osiris X, it did not handle Nintendo 64 games very well. Let's see if we get any better frame rates using RetroArch through Linux on the PS4. So we'll download Muppin 64 next, the Nintendo 64 emulator. So we'll go ahead and do that. We'll update installed cores, and we'll also update core info files and all of the other stuff that we need to update. And then of course from there we can go back and go to our import content, scan directory. We'll scan home ITmania downloads, because that's where I've put my downloads for these emulators. So we'll just go ahead and scan that. And then from there, we can go back to the main menu and we'll just quickly load content from Home ITmania downloads. And we'll load, say, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And as you can see there, it is running. Okay, and as you can see, it's running here absolutely fine. There may be some graphical bugs in the sky. I'm not sure if that's normal or not, but besides that, it's actually running absolutely fine. So this is a good comparison because obviously on the Orbis OS version of RetroArch, the homebrew RetroArch you can run on the PS4 operating system, it has real trouble running Nintendo 64 games. The emulation is not great, so it's very, very slow, poor frame rates, basically unplayable, whereas here it's completely playable on Linux. So there's definitely an advantage to using Linux on the PS4 to run your emulators rather than just going with a homebrew emulator on the PS4's operating system. So it's definitely worthwhile trying to run your games through Linux to get better performance. So yeah, and compatibility as well, obviously. So there you go. So we'll go ahead and close content and we'll exit out of RetroArch now. So now we can have a look at Steam, running Steam on the PS4 on Linux. Okay, so I've signed into my Steam account here, and what I'm going to do is download a game. For example, let's just do Portal because it's a pretty small game, so we'll go ahead and install that. And then while that's going, there's also games here, as you can see, that are not installable, like Halo, the Master Chief Collection. I don't know, I just find it funny running like what was an Xbox exclusive on a PS4. But yeah, so for example, this is not installable right now because it's only for Windows. But you can get these games installed if you just head up to Steam in the top left-hand corner and you go down to Settings and then select Steam Play in the bottom left here. You can basically enable Steam Play for all other titles using Proton Experimental. So if you select those two options using Proton, then okay, it will require a restart. Let's just go ahead and do that. So what Proton basically does is it kind of emulates Windows, or it's kind of like a Windows wrapper, essentially, which will allow the game to run. So the game thinks it's running in a Windows environment, essentially, when it's still running on Linux. And you'll be able to get more games running that way. So if we go ahead and go back to our library here, and I go back to, Halo, the Master Chief Collection, you can see it now has the option to install, which it didn't have before. So I can go ahead and start installing this, 36 gigabytes. Okay, that's not too terrible. Let's go ahead and do that and see if we can get that running here on our PS4. And then I'll also download this older game, Supreme Commander, because again, it's not very big. And this is a game that I know for a fact, at least last time I tried it, does not run very well using Steam Play, using Proton on Steam. But there's other ways of getting games that are kind of awkward like this one actually working in a playable state. So I'll also install this one as well to kind of showcase that. So we'll go ahead and install that. Okay, so the games have downloaded now. So let's try Portal first of all. So this is a native Linux game, so it should run perfectly fine. Shouldn't be any issues with this. Plus it's obviously an old game, so the PS4 should be able to handle this one. All right, so we're sitting at like 100 FPS, 120 FPS. So yeah, it's running. Not too bad. A little bit glitchy, but overall it's running perfectly fine. 120 FPS. So yeah, anyway, that's one game right there that runs. So let's go ahead and exit here. Obviously that was a native game running within Linux, so there shouldn't be major issue with that one. But let's try a newer game here, Halo the Master Chief Collection, one that's wasn't even supported, a supported title through Proton, but we'll try and run it through Proton here anyway. So this game launched with Steam Play, blah, 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 continue. We want to make sure we run the one with the anti-cheat disabled if you have that option, because the anti-cheats don't like, Windows wrappers and running through Linux and stuff. So yeah, it's best not to run it with the anti-cheat enabled. Okay, so we've loaded into the game, and as you can see, it is running perfectly fine. It's totally playable right here. And obviously you can switch to the classic graphics if it gets, if the performance is too poor, you can always switch to the classic graphics and you'll definitely get a high enough frame rate for it to be playable there. But even here, it is playable. Now, one of the issues, as I said at the start of the video, is that with the PS4 Pro, there's this issue with the LinuxLoader right now that causes poorer performance in games, even worse performance than a base PS4 in Linux right now. So obviously, once that bug is fixed, you can actually run this game at like 60 frames per second at 720p performance mode. But obviously, I'm getting worse performance than that right now because of that bug. But if you're on a base PS4 or that bug has been fixed in the LinuxLoader by the time that you're trying to run a game like this, then you should get better performance than what I'm getting here. So just bear that in mind. So this isn't necessarily representative of the performance you're going to get. You're probably going to get better performance if that bug has been fixed, or if you're using a base PS4 which doesn't suffer from that bug. So yeah, but as you can see, even with the bug, this is still pretty playable. All right, so there we go. So that was Halo the Master Chief Collection. So here's another example of another game that does not run, even with Proton, it does not run very well, at least the last time I tried to run this. So this is Supreme Commander. So we'll go ahead and try and run this. The game is running. Okay, I'll give it that. The game is running. It got further, but it says that's a lie, that FPS counter, because as you can see, it's just locking up completely. It like locks up for like a solid 20 seconds and then it starts running again and then it locks up again. So yeah, it's pretty screwed up. All right, so as you can see there, it wasn't really playable. So this is where we come into using Lutris. So what we're going to do is we're going to head into games and we're going to go into Lutris and we're going to use this. Now, unfortunately, Lutris is kind of worse than it used to be. It used to have a lot more options. Now it's kind of more bare bones and has a lot of issues. I don't know why they stripped a bunch of features from it, but this is basically what we're going to use to get the games running more smoothly. We can do a bunch of optimizations to get the game working. You know, I know it's kind of crazy that I'm covering this and going into detail on just getting games more playable, but I think it is important to show that, you know, if you put a little bit of effort into it, you can get games running much better than they otherwise would through Steam normally. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first of all go into the runners options here. So if we click the settings option next to runners, we're going to scroll down and install the Wine version of Steam. So we've got Steam here. We can install the Wine version of it, which is the Windows version of Steam running through the Wine Windows wrapper, which gives us more compatibility because you can use different versions of Wine to try and get the games running better. All right, there we go. So if we refresh now, you can see that the Wine version of Steam is installed. The Windows version of Steam is installed. There's also this option next to Wine as well, so you can download different versions and install different versions of Wine just to get better compatibility with certain games. And that's another option. So anyway, to get this game working, and I think this is a good example because this game just does not run at all through Proton on Steam, which you will find with certain games. That's quite a common thing. But we should be able to get this running in a playable state here through Lutris. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the internet browser and we're going to go to lutris.net and we're just going to search for the game to get an install script for it. And this is good because Lutris basically does all the kind of tweaks to get the game running in a more playable state here via the install script. So we just hit install and that should open up Lutris and we can install it here. And this isn't, you know, downloading the game. It's just kind of configuring all the settings required to get the game to run more smoothly. So one of the issues, if I right click and go into the configure option, once we've added the game, we can see that if I go to game options, there's no prefix in here and there should be. So if I go into the runner options, I'm just going to copy the prefix from here. So you've got default Wine prefix for 64-bit, so I'll just copy that and put that in the game options prefix, and that should get the game or get the Wine version of Steam to actually launch. So we just want to make sure we add that and now basically try and start the game. So if we right click and play, what this should do is it should launch us into Steam as it's doing here. So now we're ready to install the game, but obviously I already have the game installed on the Linux version of Steam, and it's the Windows version that's installed anyway because it was running through Proton on Steam. So I already have it downloaded. I just need to move it to the install location of the Windows version of Steam instead of having to download it a second time, which is actually not too difficult to do. So basically what I need to do, and for some reason, I guess because this is full screened, I don't want to actually click next or cancel this. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to do Control-Alt-Delete to bring up the task manager just to get out of there. So I can get onto the file manager, and I'll open up the file manager here. And then what we're going to do is go to the install location of the Linux version of Steam, which is in Home, ITmania, then .local. And then you've got Share, and then you've got Steam. And obviously we have Steam Apps. And then in Steam Apps, you've got Common, and then the game is right here. So I'm just going to cut it out of Common, and then go back to Share, and go into Lutris, and then Runners. And then from here, we have Wine Steam, Prefix 64, Drive C, Program Files 86, Steam, and then the same place, Steam Apps. And then in Steam Apps, we don't have a common folder yet. So we'll create the common folder and just paste it in here. So we've moved the game from the Linux version to the Windows install location for the games. So now all I have to do is head back in here, click next and agree, and it should detect that the game's already there. So discovering existing files, which means obviously that it detects the game is already installed. Okay, and there we go. You can see it's finished downloading. It just discovered existing files and verified them, and then it was done. Didn't have to download it again. So yeah, that should be it. Now, it probably isn't going to run here because after you initially install it, it tends to not run. All right, so all we have to do now is go ahead and run it again now that it's installed, and it will hopefully work. Okay, there we go. The game is running. And unfortunately, it's still not running perfectly well, as you can see. But I mean, it's getting a lot further. It's much better than it was before. Whereas on Steam, if you remember, it was basically not running at all. None of these cutscenes were playing. You can see it's playing, but it's very, very laggy. We'll go ahead and just create a profile here and see what happens. There we go. So you can tell as I move the mouse up and down, you can see how laggy it is. You can see the frame rate, how long it takes for the menus to catch up to where the mouse is. So pretty slow. This can be further improved though. Okay, so in terms of improving that, what we can do is we can install D9VK. If I right click and go to configure, you can see that Lutris currently, if we go to the runner options, so as you can see, DXVK is enabled, and it's basically a translator. It translates the DirectX calls to Vulkan, to the Vulkan renderer, so that it can, get better performance out of the game by using Vulkan. So that is essentially what it does, but unfortunately this game is an older title. It uses DirectX 9 instead of DirectX 10 or 11, so therefore DXVK does not work with this title, and that's why we're getting poor performance. So unfortunately Lutris used to have D9VK, which is DirectX 9 to Vulkan converter, so it used to have that built in, but it doesn't anymore. So what I'm going to have to do is do it manually, install D9VK manually. To do that, I just went to the GitHub page for D9VK to the releases and went ahead and basically downloaded D9VK right here. So what we can do is we can just go into the install location of DXVK for Lutris. So if we go to .local and then we go into share and we go to Lutris, and then from Lutris we go into runtime and we have DXVK right here. So just a quick kind of way to get this working, what I'm going to do is rename this to _back for backup and copy the name of it. So create a backup of the DXVK version and then create another new folder with the original name and basically extract D9VK into that location. So if we just select this here and extract, and we select this location to extract to, and then we click OK. That should extract it right there. Unfortunately, it's got the whole folder, which we don't want, so we'll just cut it out of here and put it right there and delete. And boom. So now you can see the original one has x32, x64, and so does our new one. So we've basically just replaced DXVK with D9VK. So now that that's done, if we go ahead and run Supreme Commander now, what should happen is it should use D9VK instead of DXVK, and we should get better performance here. So let's see if that made a difference. Yep, there we go. As you can see, that is much smoother. Much smoother. I don't have a frame rate counter, but you can definitely tell that is running perfectly smooth compared to what it was before. Just look how smooth those animations are. So yeah, as you can see, you can take a game that does not run at all initially and get it to a point where it is running at a playable state. As you can see here, look how much smoother those mouse movements are over the menu right there. So let's go into a quick multiplayer game just to make sure that things are running okay. I mean, I could increase the resolution to make this bigger, blow it up to full screen, but we'll just keep it in windowed mode for now. And yeah, as you can see, things are running. Everything seems pretty smooth. Yeah, I'm not really noticing any major problems. It's pretty fast. Let's go ahead and try and construct something real quick. So yeah, as you can see, that is working, no problem. Yep, all good. So yeah, that's basically it. As you can see, you can get games running fairly well there through, you know, the Wine version of Steam. Kill all wine processes. Oh, I wish I knew that was there initially. Kill all wine processes. I've had to use Task Manager. So yeah, anyway, obviously that's a cheap trick to do that. And for most games that you're going to be running, you're probably going to be running newer games that use DirectX 10 or 11. So you probably won't have that issue with having to install D9 VK unless you're using much older games like this one. But that's just an example of taking a game that didn't work at all and getting it to run in a playable state. So yeah, it's definitely worth investing your time into, you know, if there's a game that you can't get running that you really want to run, you probably can get it working. It's just going to require a bit of effort here, like what I just had to do with this game right here. So yeah, as you can see, you can get a lot more PC games running. And Lutris is also good for other things as well. For example, you can install other emulators through Lutris that are going to be more tricky to install manually. So for example, one emulator that a lot of people want to use on PS4 is Cemu. So if we go back onto lutris.net and we search for Cemu, the Cemu emulator, which is the Wii U emulator. So if we search for that here, as you can see, there is an install script for it. So we can just install it immediately and it should work no problem. Just install, continue, and let it do all of its stuff, because installing this manually is a bit more tricky. And it's not just Cemu and other emulators that you can install with this. You can also get things like, you know, other launchers working. For example, if you want to run the Epic Games launcher or the Blizzard launcher, then you can use Lutris to get those installed just by running an install script. And those launchers are going to be much more difficult to get working by installing them manually, whereas it's just one click basically with Lutris to get them working. So obviously it might take a few other tweaks within Lutris, but I have been able to get the Blizzard launcher and the Epic Games launcher working before with Lutris on the PS4. So as you can see here, Cemu has installed. If we try and run it, we'll see if it works. So it's not actually working. If I try and run it here, you can see it says stop as if it's running, and then after a few seconds it will go back to saying start again, so it's not actually launching. So this is a perfect example of changing the Wine version to get it working. If I go to configure, I can then go into runner options and change the Wine version from the default to Wine staging, which is the one I said works most of the time. So if we go ahead and change it to Wine staging and then run that instead, and there we go, it ran no problem through the staging version. And of course, if we go over to help, we can go ahead and, you know, check for updates and install the latest version. I'm not going to go over setting up this emulator because there's a lot of setup to actually get the Wii U games running just within the emulator. So, you know, I'm not going to go into detail, but we've updated to 1.23. So you can get your Wii U games running, which is pretty awesome, being able to play a game that's basically technically on the same generation as the PS4 itself, you know, if you think about it. So, and I do have a whole tutorial on setting up the Cemu emulator on the PS4 to get it working and get games running as best as possible, really. So yeah, there you go. So you can use Lutris to get more emulators, to get other launchers working, and to get lots of games working that aren't working before. So yeah, pretty awesome stuff right there. So there's one last thing though that I want to show you guys, and I highly recommend you do this, and that is setting up some swap space. Okay, so the final thing we're going to do is set up some swap space. So if I click up here and I go to System Tools Conkey, so what you can see is that the swap usage is currently set to 0 bytes out of 0 bytes. So if you don't know what swap space is, it's basically like reserved memory on your storage device that's used instead of RAM when you use up all the RAM in your system, when you use up all your memory, which can definitely happen if you're running emulators like Cemu that cache a lot of shaders in memory, which uses up most of your memory. And then what happens when you do use up all your memory and you don't have any swap available, then the whole console will just crash. It will completely freeze up. So that can definitely happen, especially if you're running the 3 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes of VRAM payload where you have less memory available. As you can see, I've only got about 5 gigabytes because I'm currently using the 3 gigabytes of VRAM payload, whereas if you were using the 1 gigabyte of VRAM payload, you would have about 7 gigabytes of RAM available. So setting up swap space is definitely something you should do to avoid the console freezing when you use up all the memory in your system. So in order to set up some swap space, what we're going to do is click down on the terminal. And on the terminal, we're going to do cd / to bring us into the root directory. If we type in ls, it will tell us that we're in the root directory. As you can see, we've got bin, boot, dev, etc. That's where you want to be. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type in su, enter, and log in with ITmania. And that will log you into the super user. So then we're just going to type in touch / swap file to create the swap file in the root directory. Then what we're going to do is allocate how much memory we want to give the swap. So we're going to do f allocate -l, and I'm going to give it 4 gigabytes to the swap file, just like that. So obviously, if you don't have much storage space on your storage device that's running Linux, then give it less. Give it maybe 1 gigabyte or 2 gigabytes. So we'll go ahead and do that. Then we need to give it the appropriate permissions by typing in chmod 600 / swap file. Then we're going to make it a swap file by typing in mkswap / swap file. And that creates it right there. Then we can enable the swap by typing in swap on / swap file. And that enables the swap. So you can see up here, it's now changed from 0 bytes to 3.72 gigabytes right there. So we now have about 4 gigabytes roughly of swap space available. So this will not apply when you reboot the system. So in order to make it permanent, so that when we reboot the system, the swap space will be active, what we need to do is edit a file. So we're going to do nano /etc /fstab, type in / swap file, then tab and none, and then tab swap, and then tab again SW, and then tab again 0 space 0. That's what you want to enter, and then Control X to exit, Y for yes to save, and enter, and that will save that to that file. So the next time you reboot the system, the swap space should automatically be activated. And that will help prevent you from crashing or the whole system from just freezing when you use up all the memory in your system, which is great for when you're running emulators that cache a lot of shaders in memory. So that will definitely come in handy. So finally, if you want to get more performance on the PS4, you can overclock the CPU. It's not something I would recommend because obviously the PS4 is basically like an oven on the base clocks. So even on the base clock speed, it's on the verge of, overheating anyway. So overclocking definitely runs a risk of damaging the system over time. So that's why I wouldn't recommend doing it. But there are people out there who are running like the PS4 Pro at 2.7 gigahertz and are apparently not having issues. So, take that as you will, but do so at your own risk if you want to overclock it. The easiest way to do it is just to use a modified bzImage file that has the clocks modified to a higher number than they normally run at. So I'll put a few of them in the description. There's a couple from ITmania. There's a 1.9 gigahertz overclock for base PS4s, a 2.1 gigahertz overclock for base PS4s, and a 2.4 gigahertz overclock for PS4 Pros, which can just squeeze a bit of extra performance out of the system. But again, I wouldn't recommend it because of the overheating issues and the damage that could be caused to your PS4 over time. So, do so at your own risk, obviously. But I'll link them in the description anyway. So yeah, that's basically it, guys. That is how you set up Linux on the PS4 and get more PC games running and emulators running and get everything set up as you can see here. Customize it, get your swap space set up. That is how you do it all. This has been probably the longest tutorial I've probably ever made, so it's going to take a hell of a long time to upload. But rather than making separate videos on each thing, I thought I would just, have one big video that covers it all and have all the timestamps in the description for the various different sections. So yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. Stay tuned for more, episodes in this series. There's still lots of other things I want to cover in the series, but don't worry, there'll be much shorter videos than this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next video.